This is the Natural History Museum. Welcome to NHM Live.
In a couple of minutes, you'll be meeting one of our scientists.
This is your chance to ask some questions directly.
We look forward to hearing from you. Let's find out who our scientist is today.
My name's Jon Ablett. I'm Senior Curator of Molluscs here at the Natural History Museum. I always tell people that being a curator is a bit like being a librarian, but instead of looking after books, I look after about 9 million preserved mollusk specimens. Molluscs are quite a diverse group of organisms. They include things like slugs and snails you might find in your garden. They include seashells, they include bivalves, things like clams, mussels or oysters, and also the cephalopods, squid, octopus, cuttlefish and their relatives. One of the things I love about my job is just how varied it is. Every day can be doing something different. One of my roles is to look after scientists who might visit the collection, to assist them to find out all the information that they need to further their studies. I also get to do my own research, measuring shells, looking for type specimens, looking for historical specimens. Also, we get many new specimens to the collection, either sent from scientists around the world or collected by scientists in-house, so we have to identify these, catalogue them, and add them to the national collections.
Well, hi there everyone, welcome to NHM Live. I'm Alastair, I'll be your host for the show today. This is our first ever show, welcome, and this is a great opportunity for you to speak directly to our scientists. So if you have any questions during our show this afternoon, please just send them in. We'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can. As you just saw there, I'm joined today by Jon Ablett. He is a curator here in the museum looking after the cephalopods. So today's show will be all about some of the animals you can see in front of us. Thanks very much, Jon, for coming along. So if you've got any questions for Jon in the show, just send them in and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So for those at home that are watching, if they haven't heard of a cephalopod, what exactly is that?
Okay, so a cephalopod is a subgroup of the phylum Mollusc. And molluscs are a really diverse group of animals. They include things like slugs and snails you may find in your garden. They include seashells. They include bivalves, so things like clams, mussels, oysters and their relatives. And then there's a few other groups, and the other big group are cephalopods. So examples of cephalopods are squid, octopus, cuttlefish, a few different types and different species. And yeah, we've got a few here today.
So molluscs sounds like it's a huge group, very diverse. So the slugs and snails we see in our gardens all the time do have a connection to these things we've got on the table here.
Yep, the cephalopods are only marine though, so molluscs can live in all environments, but the cephalopods are just marine creatures.
Excellent. Okay, well we'll take a look at a few of these. They look incredible actually, some of these. Let's start with this specimen on the end here, which has this fantastic looking shell. Can you tell us about this one?
It's a beauty, isn't it? This is a chambered nautilus. Really beautiful specimen. We call them living fossils because they've been in the fossil record for over 450 million years. And in fact, if you look at fossils that are kind of 250 odd million years old, they look very, very similar to the specimen today. So they haven't really evolved that much. They're very similar to their ancestors. So they have an external shell. You can see here they have an external chambered shell. The animal here looks kind of a bit like a squashed up kind of octopus type creature. And then it has chambers here that it uses for buoyancy. So shell, molluscs, you get the link there to snails. That's another factor they have in common. They have about 90 tentacles.
90?
90 tentacles in 2 rings around the mouth, but they don't have any suckers on at all.
Okay, we'll talk about the suckers in just a little bit. So this is one of the few cephalopods where you can really see that shell. They look beautiful. Do the colours or markings have anything? Do you know what they're for? Is it a camouflage in the water? Or
do you know? I'm not sure. There's a few different species. Actually, I'm not sure how many species there are. Could be 2, could be 4, could be 6. But they all have variety within the species on the shell patterning. Amazing.
Now, next to that, you've got this huge jar here with something quite unusual. What's this? Again, another type of cephalopod.
So another type. This is called the cuttlefish. So you might have heard of a cuttlefish. They have a shell, but it's internal. This is the internal shell of cuttlefish. Not just found in budgies cages. They're used to feed birds as a supply of calcium. So I guess a bit like the nautilus shell, this has kind of got a honeycomb texture inside, so it's used for buoyancy in the water, but a very different shape indeed.
Excellent.
And you can see here that they have 2 long tentacles and then 8 shorter arms. And that's in comparison with this, which had the 90 tentacles around the mouth. These have 8 arms, 2 tentacles, and they have suckers on them, which that did not.
Which didn't. Okay, well, we've got a question from Camilla. She's asking if these are related at all to the ammonites. I guess the Nautilus particularly has that look of those ammonite fossils.
Yeah, they're kind of distant relatives. So They have, shared common ancestors, but not closely related.
Excellent. So the cuttlefish that we've got here, now this, to me, when I first look at them, they look a little bit similar to the specimen in this jar here. Now, this is a beautiful specimen, really nicely presented. What have we got here?
So this is a squid. This specimen is actually a sepia toothis, or a Caribbean reef squid. So it's very similar to the cuttlefish. They have 2 long tentacles and 8 shorter arms. One of the differences is in the cuttlefish, they have a fin that runs the entire length of the body. We actually call it the mantle, this kind of organ at the back.
That's the main body.
That's kind of the main body, where all the organs are kind of here would be. Whereas in squid, it's usually only at the very tip or partially away around. It doesn't run the whole length. And this is the internal shell of a squid. You can see very different, again, from that of the cuttlefish.
This one's almost, you can see through it actually, the light's coming through there.
Exactly,
very thin.
Very little structure to it. Doesn't really do much apart from tissue attachment, a little bit of structural, but no features sort of as much as the cuttlefish one.
Right, and here you can clearly see the tentacles on this one, the suckers that we mentioned. What are those suckers for? What are they using them for?
So they use them for grabbing prey. So for example, the squid might shoot out its arms, and the cuttlefish as well, shoot out the tentacles, sorry, fast moving, grab prey, pull it back into the arms, which are covered in suckers, they're stronger, there's more of them, and then they hold them in place while they kind of take small bites out of whatever they've chosen to eat.
Excellent. Got a question here from Tallulah Tempest asking, it's been suggested that octopi and squid are intelligent. What size are their brains?
So obviously the different size squid and octopus, you get different size brains, but they do have large brains for these kind of animals. Cephalopods are often said to be the most intelligent invertebrate. They've been shown to solve puzzles in laboratory experiments, things like mazes, feeding experiments. So incredibly intelligent animals. They generally have huge optic lobes, so the bits of the brain to do with vision. So that's very, very important.
Excellent. And actually, speaking of vision, this specimen that we've got in the jar here, just by looking, I can see it's got massive eyes. So I guess they're important to see in the deep water.
Exactly. So this is, as you said, a deep water specimen. This is actually a type of octopus. So here are 2 octopus, and they're from the 2 major groups within the octopus. So you've got this is a cirrate octopus. They tend to be very deep sea, kind of jelly-like. They often have a deep webbing between the arms. So unlike the squid, octopus only have arms. They don't have tentacles. So they have 8 arms.
That's a thing to remember.
That's a thing to remember.
No tentacles on an octopus.
And in these what we call the cirrate octopus, they have a deep webbing in between them. They also have tiny fins at the back. They have a very small internal shell, looks a bit like a kind of horseshoe at the top of the head. And they have 1 row of suckers with kind of filaments, these cirri, on each of the arms.
So is that kind of hair-like structures?
Yeah, kind of a hair-like structure that follows the suckers. This is kind of from the other group. This is kind of the more octopusy octopuses.
Yeah, I think this is what we're very familiar with, that kind of 8 arms shape.
This is actually a blue-ringed octopus, possibly the most venomous species of octopus. They can have 1 or 2 rows of suckers. Again, 8 arms, like all the octopuses. They don't have the fins on the back of the mantle, and they don't have an internal shell at all. So nothing. They've evolved not to have one.
The blue-ringed octopus, a beautiful specimen, famous in the James Bond movies. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yep. Excellent. So we got a question that's coming from Silvio. He's saying, my child Vittorio would like to know, what is the maximum size that a cuttlefish can reach?
Ooh, so the largest cuttlefish species is the giant Australian cuttlefish. If I'm right, it gets to about a body length of about just over a metre and a half. So that's the mantle length we often talk. Because the arms and the tentacles are a bit stretchy, it's hard to get. We usually use mantle length. I think it's just over a metre.
A metre long, so maybe a big one on the table.
Metre and a half.
Okay.
Full-size specimen.
Fantastic. And we've got one last one on the table that you brought along here, this one right at the end. Now, this is a bit of an oddity, isn't it? What's this one that you brought along? It's one of your favourites.
It is one of my favourites. So there are other groups within the cephalopods, a bit more obscure, and we didn't have time to talk about them all, but this is a fave. It's got an awesome name as well. This is called, the scientific name is Vampiroteuthis infernalis, or the vampire squid.
The vampire squid.
Yeah, and Vampiroteuthis infernalis translates as the vampire squid from hell, which is kind of awesome.
It must be great fun naming these things when they're discovered.
So, vampire squid, not a squid. So that's one of the reasons we don't use common names. They can be quite deceptive. It's kind of an in-between group between the squid and the octopus, not quite closely related to either group. Its closest relatives are extinct now. And a bit like we were saying with the cirrate octopus, they have this deep webbing in between the arms.
So just like the octopus, they have 8 arms joined by this webbing, but they also have 2 long filaments on either side, these feeding filaments. So not tentacles, but another kind of structure. Sadly, they've kind of broken off in this specimen.
You've always got exceptions to the rule.
Always exceptions to the rule.
Actually, just looking at that, it looks almost like a black cape. I wonder did you think that maybe fed into the idea of it being a vampire?
Maybe. Really unusual animals. They don't survive too well when you bring them up from the deep ocean. I really love them. One thing they do is they produce glow-in-the-dark ink, because just like most cephalopods, they produce ink, and there's no point in producing black ink in the deep ocean because it's very dark.
Yep.
So they produce this luminescent ink in order to scare away potential predators.
Okay. Well, we got a question came through from Sarah. She's saying they have amazing colour changing ability. How are they actually able to do this, and why has that been lost in the preservation process here?
Okay, so the preservation process, the way we do it, we preserve things in alcohol, and it's amazing at fixing the actual specimen, so preserving the specimen, its structure, but it washes pigment out of it over time. Structural colours, things that you find, for example, on snake scales, where it's the surface that produces the colour, they actually do preserve in alcohol, but pigments, the kind you find in cephalopods, don't preserve, and they're washed out over time. So how do the cephalopods change colour? Well, they have cells in the top of their skin called chromatophores. And these are kind of like a balloon type of cell filled with a pigment, and by expanding and contracting the cell, they can show more or less of the pigment, and they're covered in tens of thousands of them, hundreds of thousands, and by expanding different ones of different coloured pigment, they can change colour very, very fast, in kind of as fast as a neuron fires.
Yeah, it is an amazing ability. The chameleons have nothing on these guys, really.
No, exactly, and the cuttlefish are real masters of this. So, deep sea things, not so much change colour, but cuttlefish, things that live on reefs, really colourful, really amazing.
Fantastic. Okay, well, a little bit earlier on, John and I went and had a look on the inside of a squid, because it's not always about what you see on the outside. So we did a dissection of one of our squid specimens. So let's go and have a look at how we got on with that.
So we've just been learning about the cephalopods, animals like the squid and the octopus, and we'll be back in the studio in just a few minutes to take more of your questions. But for now, I'm in the dissection room with John, and we're going to be taking a closer look at a squid. And we've got a fantastic specimen on the table here. So, John, what are we actually looking at here? What is this?
So this is Loligo vulgaris, one of the common European squids.
Excellent. So we're going to do a bit of a dissection. We're going to have a look at a few different parts. I've got a camera here, so we'll get this on the specimen, and you can maybe talk us through what we can see here. Give us a close-up look.
Okay, well, let's start at this end. So because it's a squid, you've got these 2 long tentacles, and you can see you just have these large suckers at the end on what we call the tentacle club, and then the rest of them is smooth. There's no suckers on it. If we move up, you've got the 8 shorter arms, and these have suckers all the way along the whole length. So that's one of the differences. If you've got suckers all the way along, then it's an arm. Then we've got the head region here. So the brain is inside here, and there's 2 fairly large eyes. So this is the main body, and we call this the mantle. And this is pretty much where all the organs are housed. So everything that you'd kind of find here in a human is kind of secreted here in the squid. And you can see it's covered with a top layer of what are called chromatophores, which are colour-changing cells. These expand and contract, they contain different pigments, and by expanding and contracting different pigments at different rates, they can change their shades. And in some species, although not really in this species, they can vastly change their colour. So you can see in this species, the fins are quite large. So if we'd never seen one in the environment, we'd know that it was going to be a fast-moving, active species.
Fantastic. Well, should we have a look inside and see what's in that mantle?
Let's have a look inside. So we're going to cut straight up the middle, avoiding everything else that's inside. The best way to do this, if you're doing this at home, is to put the funnel facing you and then cut up. And that's the best way to get a good view of everything inside. Wow, this is a lovely specimen. Okay, so looks like we have a male specimen. What do you notice when you look in here? I guess my eye is probably joined to this here, this silvery area here. And this is the ink sac. Like most cephalopods, they have an ink sac where they produce and then excrete ink from. And you can see this silver area here, that's that. On either side here, you've got 2 big muscles that it uses for positioning the funnel. So this can move in either direction by using these muscles along here. Then just running down here, you've got the end of the digestive system. So food would go in the mouth, it goes up through to this through up to the stomach, which is sort of around this area, just behind this gill here. And then the food is excreted back down this sort of transparent tube and out through the funnel. So the same way that the ink goes out, that's the way that the waste products get out too.
So water, ink, and food waste all comes out the same way?
All comes out the same way.
Okay.
And here we have these lovely structures here are called the gills. And I guess, can you make out the kind of feathery-like structure? So I guess a bit like our lungs, they're branched with a kind of feather-like veiny structure, give them bigger surface area. So while that water is passing over, it gives it a greater surface area and it can extract more oxygen. And one of the many interesting things about squid is that they have 3 hearts, not just one like we do, they have 3. So each gill has its own heart. So let's see if we can see it here. So this is one here. It's what we call a brachial or a gill heart. And there's one on the other side just under here somewhere. And in the center there is a central heart which pumps the blood around the body here, which is called the systematic heart. In the majority of male squid species, there is no external penis. The penis actually ends within the body. So how do you pass your sperm to a female? Well, they actually modify one of the arms, and it's called a hectocotylus. So it's usually the 4th arm when you're counting along. And I don't know if you can pick that up, but if I bend this over, you can see a kind of, instead of the suckers like there are on most arms, there's these kind of little sort of prongs, I guess like a brush. And what the squid will do, it'll use these to pick up sperm, and then it'll actually physically pass the sperm over to the female. So that's how they mate.
Very romantic.
Very romantic indeed.
Well, welcome back. If you've just joined us, I'm here with Jon Ablett in the Natural History Museum. We're looking at the cephalopods, and we've just seen there a dissection of one of our specimens, having a look at what's on the inside of these incredible animals. We've had a few questions come through while that's been on, John. We've got one question from Alison, is what depth does a squid actually dive to?
Okay, so I mean, there's a few hundred different species of squid, and they go to different depths. You get some that only live at the surface. Some squid have been thought to go down as deep as possibly 2,000 meters for some of these deep water species. I think there's octopus that go even deeper, actually. I think octopus have been down to 5,000 meters.
Wow,
but
so
yeah,
they can
so
go
pretty
very deep indeed. Excellent. Now, another question came in from Daryl. Very interesting point here. He's saying that it's been suggested that cephalopods are the animals most likely to be suitable to undertake space exploration, as opposed to humans who are very poorly equipped to cope with space travel. Is that true at all?
Ooh, do you know what? I've never heard that.
That's a really interesting answer. I never heard that before.
I actually have heard that when thinking about life on other planets, they've asked biologists to think what body plan could an animal have, and cephalopods are often suggested as something that could survive in different environments. A kind of cephalopod style. Obviously, they wouldn't be cephalopods because they wouldn't have evolved from life on Earth. And the deep ocean is a really an alien environment, so I guess, they kind of are like aliens already.
Very, very adaptable, very strange looking animals, for sure. And I suppose related to that, Andrew's asking, what's the smartest cephalopod? Because they are known to be quite intelligent animals. I'm not sure if they can build a spaceship yet, but they are very clever.
I'm not really sure, actually, to be fair. I mean, it's very hard to judge intelligence, between species and within species. I think it's the common cuttlefish and the common squid they usually use in lab experiments. But there are ethical issues around lab experiments because they're a protected invertebrate group, so you have to have a license to work on them.
Of course. Excellent. Now, that dissection that we just saw, Alison's asking, why does a squid need 3 hearts? Which you pointed out in the video there. Why is that?
Okay, so they have 2 hearts, one on each gill, and that pumps the blood to the gills. And they have a central one that pushes it around the body, and that's because they don't have such a closed system as we have. So they don't have the kind of structure we have that kind of narrows the blood flow to keep it pumping around the body. So this gives it the extra push to get it round.
Fantastic. And Camilla's asking, well, how did you know that was a male squid that we dissected?
Because one of the arms was modified into what we call a hectocotylus, and this is a way of transferring sperm from literally inside the squid reaches, grabs the sperm packet and passes it to the female. Actually, a few squid species actually have external genitals, so some of them have an external penis, so then you can tell that way.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got a question that's just come in from Sally. She's asking, how big is the largest squid in the museum's collection?
Ooh, that's a good question.
So how big is the biggest squid we've got?
So the biggest squid we've got in our collection is 8.62 metres long, and it belongs to the giant squid, Architeuthis dux, which is the scientific name that we refer to it by. The specimen, we've actually got a fair few specimens in the museum. Most of them are actually bits, so they've either come washed up on beaches or more commonly from the stomachs of sperm whales. Sperm whales are one of the few things that get big enough to feed on giant squids. But our specimen, Archie, as we like to call her, which is 8.6 metres long, was live caught by some fishermen in the Falkland Islands and now on display here at the museum.
It must have given those fishermen a bit of a fright when they pulled up. Did it come up in the nets?
It did. It got caught in the nets, and they donated it to the fisheries on the Falkland Islands, who in turn donated it to us here at the museum.
A lot of people are often surprised that a giant squid like this is often something we think of in kind of myth and legend, but they are very real animals, and the fact that we've got them in the collection is a testament to that.
So, yeah, I guess lots of cultures have this kind of big cephalopod kind of myth. You've got the Kraken in Northern Europe. You think of, Pirates of the Caribbean style kind of monsters pulling down ships. You've got the Skylar in Greece. You've got Caribbean legends, Japanese and Chinese legends of huge octopusy squid-like creatures. But it was really only in the mid-1800s, really, that they were lots of specimens seemed to wash up or were found, and they were studied scientifically. And that's when they were found to be a large squid species, Architeuthis dux.
Excellent. And I suppose the opposite from that, Don's asking on, and how small is the smallest squid? What's the other extreme?
The smallest squid, not very big, a couple of centimetres long. You get some very small mid-water squids, some crankid squids, things like that. To be clear, see-through, and yeah, very, very small.
Excellent. Okay. Well, you've brought along a few examples of the giant squid specimens. So before we had Archie, our collection was a little bit lacking in the big animals, and this in here is giant squid, even though it can be quite hard to tell.
Yeah, as I was saying before, most of the giant squid material is stomach contents from sperm whales. So when whaling was common, you'd have scientists on board who'd go through the stomach contents and send bits out to museums and scientists around the world. And they're bits, you might get a tentacle or an arm, the mouth parts, maybe a bit of body. Occasionally they wash up. We have one in our collection that washed up in Scarborough in the north of England in 1936. But that's very, very rare, so normally it's bits. So to get Archie was such a treat, to have a huge intact specimen. You could really learn a lot about this species.
Amazing. And then next to that, we've got in this jar here what looks like a beak, is that right?
That is
from giant squid?
This is a giant squid beak, again from the stomach of a sperm whale. It always amazes me, they're not actually that big. You think,
Yeah, how do we know how big the squid would be that had a beak that
We
size?
don't. You can do kind of calculations to kind of guesstimate how they're big, but I haven't actually done it for this specimen. But on the left here, we have a bigger beak. So here we go.
Look at this. Look at this. Looks fantastic.
So you can see in comparison to the one on the table and also in the video, it's a lot darker in colour, obviously a lot larger. And that's because it's made of a substance called chitin, and there's a far higher chitin content in this, which gives it that dark colour, makes it a lot stronger.
Is it quite hard? Can I touch it?
Of course.
So that's quite solid. Really solid, in fact. Yeah.
So the structure means it's very, very strong for biting through bone or flesh. And it's also harder at the tip than it is here. So it gives it the flexibility because they don't have bones for support. So it needs to be soft and supple here, but yet strong at the tip.
Well, Julie's been asking, what do giant squid eat? So I guess they're quite fierce predators with beaks like that.
They are, and we know a fair bit about what giant squid eat. Things like fast-moving fish, hoki and hake. In fact, our Archie specimen was probably going for the fish that the fishermen were after when it got caught in the nets.
Right.
They eat smaller squid species, and in fact, a few giant squid specimens have been found with other giant squid tissue in the stomach. So there was some thought that it could be a cannibal as well.
Wow, okay, it's all going on down there in the deep sea. And then finally, this magnificent looking specimen here, this surely must come from giant squid as well, given the size.
No, this is from a bigger, rarer species. Bigger. So you've got something called the giant squid, you find something bigger, what do you call it? You call it the colossal squid. So this is from a colossal squid, Mesonocochuthis hamiltoni is the scientific name. Again, mainly found from stomach contents, from sperm whales. Only live in Antarctic waters, whereas the giant squid lives in mainly most of the world's oceans, but not at the equator and not at polar regions. And, okay, so bear with me. They've never found a fully grown colossal squid,
right?
But the juvenile colossal squid get bigger than the juvenile giant squid. So we think that giant squid get to about 13 metres for the females, 10 for the males, and we think colossal squid could possibly get up to 18 metres, even more, who knows?
18 metres, yeah, gosh. It shows that those legends that we might have heard of, there could well be, these animals kind of do exist.
Exactly.
And we just have to find them. Excellent. And we've got a question coming from Aaron. He's asking, how many types of squid are there? So we've had a look at a few examples today, but there's obviously many, many more that we've got in the collection.
So there's about 1,000 species of cephalopod, and within that a couple of hundred species of squid. Probably still many more to be discovered. There's lots of things to discover in the deep ocean. One of the reasons I love biology, natural history, there's so much work to be done investigating new species, investigating the way these species are related to each other and how they act in the wild. Within the museum collections, I don't actually know precisely how many. I've got about half a storeroom full of squid and octopus and their relatives. Well, I guess maybe 350,000 jars of specimens.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
You've definitely got your work cut out for you. Okay, we've got a few more questions we'll come through. So there's some really interesting ones coming here. We've got from Susanna. She's saying, I understand that some squids take part in sneaky mating. What's that about? And can we talk about that on the show?
We can. So the giant Australian cuttlefish, which we talked about earlier actually, they live in harems. They live in Australia, surprisingly. And harems are where the big dominant male fights the smaller males to win mating rights. So what do you do if you're a small giant Australian cuttlefish? Well, you pretend to be a female. So they mimic the female's coloration and posture, and they live in the community as a female. They do get mated with by the dominant male, and when his back is turned, then they change their coloration, change their posture, advertising their male colorations, and then they mate with the females.
Very sneaky. Maybe that's why they've got big brains as well. You must have to be quite clever to pull off moves like that. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys, for all your questions. Keep them coming in. We've got lots here. Martha's asking, how do octopuses squeeze themselves through tiny spaces? What is actually happening to their cells? Do we know?
So they're invertebrates. They don't have a skeleton. So they don't have bones kind of getting in the way of their structure, limiting what they can move. In fact, if you remember the two types of octopus, the kind of octopusy octopus, which is the ones that we see, going through the really sort, they don't have any shell, if you remember. So there's nothing hard. Really, the only hard parts are their brain and their beak.
Right.
So they're limited really to what they can squeeze their brain and their beak through.
So the beak is that sort of minimum size. Everything else can be
pushed through. They can push the water around in their body to sort of change the shape of it, change the relative ratios, and then they can squeeze that through narrow cracks and gaps.
Excellent. Julia's asking, with so much passion for cephalopods, definitely got that here today, how do you feel about eating calamari?
Do you know what? I do eat calamari. Actually, if you're worried about fish stocks and marine stocks, they're a very good group of animals to eat. They're actually increasing, and that's probably because as people take more predatory fish out of the waters, large predatory squid are kind of expanding because they have less competition for food. So in many areas of the world, they're actually becoming more abundant. So it's a good thing to eat.
Yeah, I think you've maybe heard of squid and chips. I've heard that's something that some places
are
trying to do. After cod's gone, we'll have, instead of fish and chips, we'll have squid and chips. Okay. Joel's asking, why does Japan have a lot of giant squids in their waters? I think the Japanese certainly do seem to do a lot of research on animals like this. Why is that? Is there something about that environment there that's particularly conducive to them?
So you get, as I said earlier, you get giant squid in all the world's oceans, but no, not in the polar regions and around the equator. But there seems to be these hot spots where you get lots washing up or lots sighted. So off the coast of Japan is one, also off Canada as well, and Norway as well. Possibly they go there to breed. It was proved through DNA evidence quite recently. There's only one species of giant squid worldwide, not as was previously thought, a kind of Asian species, a South African species, South American species. There's one worldwide species of giant squid. So maybe these areas where they're commonly found are places where they congregate to breed or to lay their eggs, possibly.
Excellent. So it just shows it's important that we still build up these collections so we can start answering those questions about how many species there are and where they're found. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys, for all your questions. And thank you, Jon, for bringing along your specimens today and sharing all that. It's been fascinating to hear more about these animals. If you have got more questions that we weren't able to answer, you've got more that you want to send through, Jon's going to pop online for the next 10-15 minutes or so, and he will answer as many of them as he can. So do keep them coming, and thank you very much, all of you, for sending the questions along. But thanks very much, Jon, and thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.